Welcome to MFP Live. I'm Donna Ladd, the editor of the Mississippi Free Press, and we're here today with a very special edition of MFP Live. If you didn't know, today is the National Day of Racial Healing, which is a special day designated by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, who also happens to be a supporter of our work. And what ends up happening across the country with the Day of Racial Healing is that organizations and individuals across the country put together different kinds of conversations, dialogues, events, gatherings to have conversations, perform some sort of service, to really kind of raise awareness and get people thinking and talking to each other about what racial healing looks like, or to imagine what it could look like in our state here of Mississippi or across the country. And so we have a very, very, very special group of Mississippians here to have a conversation for the next hour. I am just here to kick off the show and welcome all of them to the show and to introduce the organizer of today's panel, who is going to actually be moderating the conversation. And she put this group together. Ariel Hudson, welcome. And Ariel, I just want to tell you guys a little bit about Ariel, and then she's going to introduce everybody else to you. Ariel is a Tunica, Mississippi native. She is a 2020 graduate of the University of Mississippi, where she happened to become the first Black woman Rhodes Scholar from UM. She then got her law degree from Oxford University, and that other Oxford that we all have heard about. She's currently at Yale Law School. She is working with the Marshall Motley Project, I believe it is, through the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And her work will soon include, as I understand it, civil rights litigation across Mississippi. She is also one of 6 students who led an effort at the University of Mississippi to move the Confederate statue from the entrance of the university. And we are very happy to say that she, as well as Macy Brown over here, are members of the Mississippi Free Press Advisory Board as well. Welcome, Ariel, and I'm going to turn it over to you now, and I'll see you guys soon.
Thank you, Donna, so much for that introduction. Just kind of another introduction into this show. Many people across the country have defined the summer of 2020, following the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, as the moment of America's racial reckoning. It was a moment where many states and localities finally began to acknowledge systemic racial injustice and discrimination. It was also a moment of action. Here in Mississippi, we saw one of the largest protests in Mississippi's history. We saw the changing of our state flag, which was the last state flag to bear the Confederate battle flag. We saw the relocation of Confederate monuments and more advocacy around ridding Mississippi of other symbols of oppression and Confederate iconography. But despite these changes and that moment of racial reckoning, the question that still looms is whether that moment led to any real transformative and sustainable change for Mississippians and the quality of their lives as citizens of this state. And this is sort of the big question that I'm hoping our discussion today, combined with the wealth of all of the experience of these panelists and young leaders and organizers in Mississippi, will answer. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists of young shakers and movers in Mississippi and people I am honored to call friends. So first we have Macy Brown. Macy is a senior political science student at Jackson State University. Over the years, she has published pieces calling for a new state flag and change for Mississippians. She has a long history of organizing and mobilizing young people and plans on continuing that work after graduation. She is currently the Youth Program Director at the Institute for Democratic Education in America and the Advocacy Coordinator at the ACLU of Mississippi. She didn't put this, but it has to be said that she was also recently recognized as one of the glamorous HBCU College Women of the Year and a Teen Vogue 21 Under 21 honoree. Next, we have Leah Davis. Leah is a Tupelo native and is passionate about philanthropy, equity, and community engagement. She is a graduate of the University of Mississippi Sally McDonald Barksdale Honors College. And as a student, she advocated for diversity and inclusion initiatives, including the relocation of the Confederate statue. In 2020, she was inducted into Ole Miss's Hall of Fame. She is currently the development director for the Red Mountain Park Foundation, where she engages individuals, corporations, and foundations to support the park's mission and ensure its accessibility for the greater Birmingham, Alabama community. She was recently named as a young female leader in Birmingham to know by BHAM Now. During her free time, she loves to experience Birmingham's rich food and music scenes with friends and family, and she exercises at Red Mountain Park and Ignite Cycle. Next, we have Jordan Jefferson from Jackson, Mississippi. He is also a class of 2020 graduate and commencement speaker of Jackson State University. He holds an undergraduate degree in political science and is pursuing a master's degree in public policy at Harvard University, where he is a Belfer Young Leader Student Fellow. Jordan is a previous staff assistant to U.S. Representative Benny Thompson. At JSU, Jordan served as president and vice president of the Student Government Association. And as a student athlete, he maintained a 3.9 GPA while playing wide receiver on the JSU football team and was named Football Scholar Athlete of the Year. Next, we have Mr. Jarius Adams, originally hailing from Hattiesburg. He is a graduate of the University of Mississippi with a degree in public policy and political science. During his time at the university, he was involved in voter registration and voter education efforts with the Associated Student Body Government. In February of 2019, he led a march to help successfully remove the Confederate statue from the heart of campus. During the summer of 2020, Jarius co-organized one of the largest protests in Mississippi's history that resulted in the removal of the state's Confederate emblem flag. Jarius has worked on local, statewide, and presidential campaigns and political initiatives that work towards fully funding public education, expanding Medicaid, and restoring the African American vote. He is currently a second-year law student at Howard University School of Law, where he serves as its 2L Class Council President and a member of the Board of Directors for the National Black Law Students Association. And finally, but of course not least, we have Mr. Tyler Yarbrough. He is a native of Clarksdale and a graduate of the University of Mississippi, where he studied public policy leadership as a Stamp Scholar, Delta Scholar, and Aspen Young Leader Fellow. His scholarly and professional work focuses on community economic development, food access and public health, and energy utilities. He is currently the project manager for Partnership for a Healthier America, a national nonprofit that started alongside Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign, where he and community partners are leading a Healthy Corner Store initiative, coalition building amongst small underserved Black farmers, and a marketing campaign to promote the consumption of locally grown fruit and vegetables. So I just want to give a chance to introduce and clap for my panelists. Thank you all so much for being here. And now that I have introduced you all, I would like to give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit more about the work that you all have been engaging in through your own words.
I guess I'll just kind of get us started. Some of the work, I guess right now has really been centered in the water crisis that's happening here in Jackson. A lot of people think that just because some people are, just because the spotlight is off of it, that the water crisis doesn't still very much exist, and we're still not having a lot of issues, and like they're not very deep infrastructural issues that we're still working with. And so mine has really been coalition building with young people across Jackson and across Mississippi, and delivering water to people, educating them on different environmental issues that, you know, our water issue is rooted in, really really kind of redirecting my focus, not forgetting, the work that I've done in the past, but really, really trying to educate and invigorate the Black community around climate and environmental issues that we're all feeling the effects of and will continue to in the next few years. And I really, really like the work that you were talking about Tyler is doing, with sustainability and healthy food. And everything ties into oneness. So even when we're talking about racial healing, like healing ourselves, being healthy, being whole, wellness, like all that it's also interconnected.
Okay, I think for me, done a lot of work, as you mentioned, voting rights and restoring the vote and reentry in different areas. Aside from the things I've done in the past, right now, much of my um, advocacy is through the classroom, trying to understand what my place is after I graduate law school, because there are so many issues, particularly that affect Black people and Mississippians, and it's difficult. This is a whole nother conversation, but difficult for one or two people, or even a small group of people, to take that burden on. So right now, really trying to understand what are some of the solutions to the problems long term, and a lot of that is more on a national scale for me now that I'm in DC. In the last year, I was really involved in NAACP and the work they've been working on with student debt relief, being at the White House, going to meetings with the vice president and folks to talk about it, because it cripples young people, poor people, but also Black people even more. So that, and making sure that Black people have what they need to um, fulfill their dreams, whether they want to go to medical school, law school. I think that there are some economic barriers when you talk about the cost of the LSAT or the cost of applications or the bar exam or some of the privileges that some people have that others don't. So those are some of the things I'm working on now.
I guess I'll go next. This past spring semester, I wrote my graduate thesis on increasing Black home ownership in Jackson, Mississippi, that took so long to do and so many late nights. But thank God for good friends and great advisors. So I transitioned from that, and I briefed the mayor and the city council, a few members, the work I did on to increase Black home ownership in the city of Jackson. Now, it was very minute because I couldn't get into detail like that because you only get 80 pages. But it was really basically an outline plan to live the American dream, because I'm tired of people being asleep to dream it instead of actually living through it. So creating a Black homeownership plan was really my goal of this graduate program. Transitioning from that this summer up until January 1st, I got to work with Congressman Thompson as a policy analyst, because I worked with him in the district office, and that was very much constituent based. And I wanted to get the opportunity to see what the policy is like in the DC space, and got to hang around the January 6th committee and see how the hearings and how the committee work happens, and understanding policy and how to implement it, because there's 535 people in both houses, and it's very hard to do anything. So I wanted to get that space. So now I'm transitioning into more opportunities to stay in DC and implement what I've learned and honestly help our communities.
I'll go next. It really is an honor to be here. I mean, star-studded among friends. I think it's been a while since we've all been together, so this is good. I'm currently located in Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm the development director for the Red Mountain Park Foundation. We're a 1,500-acre green space whose mission is to connect the community where Birmingham began. And we have 16 miles of hiking, biking, walking trails. And we're located at the back door of a former company town, mining town, and we have historic iron ore mines on the property. So the neighborhoods that surround us are predominantly Black neighborhoods with a lot of that have been marked as some of the worst health determinant outcomes, And my job is to connect funds. I'm a fundraiser, so I'm all about the money, but to connect funds and resources, whether that's corporate, private, public, to the park and to further our mission in the park. Since I'm still in the South, since I'm not in Mississippi, Birmingham is very similar to Jackson and other Black metro areas where after integration, there was a whole lot of divestment into the suburbs. And we still see those effects in the back door of our park today, where other properties, if you're near a 1,500 acre green space in the Carolinas or Atlanta or North Georgia, your property values would skyrocket. But the Winona neighborhood around the park is not the case, and we know who predominantly lives there. So really working around equity and access, not only to mental health, healthcare, but to that American dream that, where you live determines the quality of education that you get, what you have access to, and really your longevity and your quality of life.
Yeah, this is a very powerful group too. And I'm glad to be here. Yeah, so I'm currently working at Partnership for a Healthy America, and we're doing a few different things. But I want to first talk about Clarksdale, Mississippi, in the heart of the Mississippi Delta. We're talking about a town that in the 1950s and the 60s had over 50,000 people in it. Now it only has 14,000. And with that, and just like a lot of rural America, you have complications with keeping a grocery store alive and thriving in the community, keeping this hospital up and thriving. I think in the last 5 years, we've had two or three times where our hospital been nearly like gone, and to just think about what would happen if it did leave. In 2018, Kroger left. And with that, an exodus of people too. And so one thing that some of the work I'm doing with Partnership for a Healthy America, and I have to say that these are my views and not the views of my organization, is that we're doing a healthy corner store initiative. So we're pretty much saying, there's this corner store, grocery store in Clarksdale called Jay's Grocery. It's been there for 20 plus years, Black owned, veteran owned. In the heart of a neighborhood, there's 3 different schools nearby, 5 different low-income apartment complexes, nursing home, retirement facility. But when Kroger left, no one thought, hey, let's go to Mr. Jones and see if he could provide more like healthy foods, healthier products in his store. And so we're trying to take an approach that help lifts him up, someone who has been in the business for so long, making it more healthier, helping improve his operations. So we're doing some good stuff around that. Another thing that we're doing, and I want y'all to think about this. When was the last time you saw some healthy marketing encouraging you to like eat something healthy? More than likely, you don't have anything. Maybe you're thinking about that McDonald's commercial or that Burger King commercial. And often when you think about unhealthy food, it is disproportionately marketed to Black and brown folks. And so we're trying to create a campaign that talks about how to get folks to consume more fruit and vegetables, how we get folks to consume more local fruit and vegetables. In Mississippi Delta, we know got all this land around us, but our communities don't have food. There's something wrong with that. The farmers who are actually growing the fresh fruit and vegetables that you can actually eat are often Black farmers, but don't have access to capital or markets. And so we're also doing coalition building with those farmers sourcing from those farmers. And to that too, I think there's been a lot of hysteria in the media, rightfully so, about the decline of Black farmers. In 1920, there was 1 million Black farmers. Today there's 45,000. So a huge decline, but we don't hear those stories of the Black farmers who are still thriving and creating a philosophy of how do we build back and provide produce for our communities. People like Robbie Pollard, who's in Marks, Mississippi, who's growing strawberries, cabbage, everything. And up until last year, I didn't know that we can even grow strawberries in Mississippi. People like Cindy Ayers Elliott at Footprint Farms in Jackson has the largest urban farm in Mississippi. You know, those are the stories that we need to be uplifting, elevating, making sure that we're getting foundations to know about their work and expanding some of the work that they're doing. So I'm glad to be back in Mississippi. Well, I didn't leave. I'm glad to be in Mississippi doing some of this work in my hometown.
Thank you all for that. And Tyler, I'm so glad that you actually brought up a lot of the issues that are facing Clarksdale right now, because this actually helps lead into my next question. You know, as Donna mentioned, today is the National Day of Racial Healing. And so across the country, people are engaging in discussions like this to talk about racial healing, to talk about reconciliation. But we can't talk about healing and we can't talk about reconciliation without first addressing the harms and the issues that we are trying to heal from. And so I really want to hear a little bit about how racism, how racial inequities and race relations in Mississippi have impacted the progress or essentially hindered the evolution of your respective communities.
Okay. I'll try to take a stab at it while everybody kind of gathers their thoughts. I would say Jackson is somebody asked me earlier, like, what is Jackson's truth? And that was at first I was like, girl, that was a really deep question, because you really, really made me think, what is Jackson's truth? What would you, and then another question was, what would you want people 100 years down the line looking back at Jackson be able to say about that city? And so for me, I think that Jackson is it's unique and non-unique at the same time, because Jackson experienced a lot of things that urban cities across the United States experience with white flight and kind of the depletion of resources and all of that stuff. But I think that's what's so unique about Jackson right now, especially when we're talking about infrastructure and environmental issues, is that so much of the blame and so much of the negative energy and just so much of it has always been focused on who's in power now, or the color of our leaders, or, oh, you only see this in majority Black cities. But what most people fail to realize is so many of these communities, to even get to this point, were not led by people who look like us. And so you have that inherent, that people have like that inherent idea of, oh, you know, Black people in leadership or majority Black cities are already ran by Black people. It's their fault if they're in this position, or their people are incompetent, or they just can't do it. But it's just like, we just got here, like water pipes being 100 years old. We didn't even have a Black mayor until 20 or so years ago. We didn't even have, you know, a majority Black, you know, city council just into a couple of decades ago. All of these problems predated us even having the opportunity to have these positions. And so for people to automatically attribute it to Black leadership or incompetent leaders is racist within itself. And then you have so many of our state officials who, again, because of, I don't believe if Jackson were not in the position that it's in, or not the demographics that it was, they would not be so hesitant to help us with which is truly a humanitarian crisis. And so you have the fact that because Jackson's 80% Black, that there was a lack of urgency to actually get funds down here to actually do some intervention. And there was, you know, people were dragging their feet actually fixing the problem. You know, after white flight happened, I guess they say, what's the point? And so you just have when it comes to Black and brown folks, it's just people just have such a lack of urgency to come to, not even to our rescue, but just to do right by us. Because if we're citizens of this country, we're citizens of the state, citizens of the city, whatever the case may be, we deserve the most basic of human rights, like clean drinking water and not possibly bursting your tire going down the street to work or school. So yeah.
Yeah, I want to add to that. Being from Hattiesburg, I guess Hattiesburg may be the third largest or fourth largest city. So there wasn't much growing strawberries, Tyler. But we do have our challenges. Although our economy is pretty good in Hattiesburg. It's a hub city. It's pretty much the same distance from the right is Mobile, Alabama. North is Jackson, Mississippi. South coast and then the left New Orleans. So a lot of people retire there. But I think our challenges with race in the state of Mississippi present themselves in different ways. I think most recently, nationally, notably, has been a Hattiesburg resident by the name of Brett Favre, who, has played with state money along with some of his buddies who are former, as far as we know, former elected officials statewide. And I think our statewide elected officials set the precedent and the image of Mississippi. They have the opportunity to help a lot of these problems that we see and we talk about, whether it's municipal or statewide or whatever. But their vision of Mississippi is not the same as mine, ours collectively, people that we care about in Mississippi. And personally, I don't think it's the best vision because we're last in everything and first in everything that's not good. So I think that Black people are sick of seeing white folks be treated differently when it comes to simple things, right? Like if you break the law, you break the law. At least that's what we're told. But it seems that there are some exceptions to certain people with class, money, connections, something that a lot of Black people don't have the resources or the ability to have. Also because of racism, because it's going to take nearly 250 years for the average Black person to meet the average wealth of a white person. So I think that our leadership has to change. We have to be engaged. Even if we move out of the state, right, we still have to find ways to contribute and give back. But I think our leadership plays a lot into that. And Black folks are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I know we know who said that.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. Being from Tupelo, Lee County, which is named after Robert E. Lee. In 2020, in the summer of 2020, there was some energy in Tupelo because we have a huge 30-foot tall Confederate statue at the Lee County Courthouse. And so I organized and got, I can't remember, it was like 2,000 signatures or more online and presented it to the county, the aldermen, the county commission. And they chose not to vote on it. Literally sitting in a vote, and they said, motion to not vote, motion to not vote. And I think Tupelo and Lee County's problem is that we don't talk about race enough. We don't address the inequities. Tupelo's having an affordable housing crisis. Economic development wise, they're only bringing in manufacturing jobs and building houses that people who work in manufacturing jobs cannot afford. Toyota is having issues, so we were depending on these big entities and these big plants that were once well-paying, but they're not in the city of Tupelo, so they're not generating income, and brain drain. And I think one thing I've noticed about, and I hope my hometown people don't get upset with me, but one thing I've noticed about the Black community in Tupelo is that we're not passing the baton to younger people. And I noticed throughout that statue fight, I did not have the support of some elders who I thought really should have supported it because I think I was too young and I didn't go to the right church. And so we can fight within ourselves, but I think presenting a united front is really important, but we're not doing enough. The conversations that Jackson's having around divestment and putting money back into Tupelo is not having those conversations, and we're leaving out the rural folks in Shannon and Nettleton and like even our neighbors and surrounding counties because we're the only hospital. We have the most jobs. We're really a commuter town for Northeast Mississippi. And so I think, one, we're not investing in youth, we're affecting brain drain. So not only are we losing young Black people and young people in general, but we're really using young qualified Black people. I couldn't find a job, so I left. And then two, we're not talking about it enough. We're having an issue with having a Black history program at high schools. Like we're not starting young, and we're not keeping that conversation going.
I would like to get in from another perspective. Like I said previously, I worked here in DC for the past 7 months, and President Biden has had a lot of legislation on like FDR level with the New Deal, with the Build Back Better package, and all of this. And the issue I have is these ideas are great, but it's the trickle down to the state level with these state rights. I think a lot of issues we have with this bill, our bills and legislation, it gives too much freedom to our legislators or municipalities to actually disperse funds. So when they disperse the funds, it's not an accountability system. I would also like to challenge people who are watching this and people who are speaking as well to challenge our lawmakers to make amendments because of how broad these legislations are. Like I said, like these are FDR level these last 2 years, and I'm worried that we won't see the implementation of it. In an example, we were advocating for bandwidth through the Mississippi Delta and the whole second congressional district because people don't have access to internet. It's 2023, but the plan for the Mississippi level doesn't fit the agenda of what the national level is trying to do. Their plan saying is to bring equity, but I really don't believe it, to be honest with you. Because the money always goes to these more affluent areas when they have opportunity from federal funds to do this. And I feel like it's going to keep going and keep going. So the idea is there, but I feel like we need to challenge our federal electors to make amendments to this broad legislation.
I could come in on this a little bit. I kind of just want to touch on racism impact to our collective memory, because and that's literally like the history we tell ourselves, the stories we passed on, what's being taught in schools. Like that's our collective history, and from that, our sense of self comes from that. And I think I'll never forget going to Ole Miss and reading a book about the history of Clarksdale and learning about civil rights activists like Aaron E. Henry and Vera Mae Piggy, and how they were not only impactful to Clarksdale and its integration and civil rights fight, but throughout the whole state. I believe in 1964, Aaron E. Henry, he was a pharmacist and veteran. He pretty much, they had like a mock election throughout the whole state to just prove the world in the country that Black folks wanted to vote. And they garnered 70,000 votes. They organized the whole election in churches, pool halls, clubs, and folks came out and voted. And it went alongside the actual election in 1964. And I remember coming home after reading some of that and like, oh, wow, like Aaron Henry did a lot of his work in Clarksdale. You know, Martin Luther King was at that church right there. And we just walk around like we don't come from that, you know? And me knowing that, I had a sense of power and I guess some willingness to change or empower other people around some of that work in the past, or even just like the work when it comes to Emmett Till and his memory. I remember going to Bryant's grocery store and the historical marker wasn't there, or being at the University of Mississippi and fraternity boys shooting up the marker, you know. That is our collective history. And not only are we denying that, but there's like constant, frequent acts of violence against that history. And so it's damaging not only to like everyone and who we are, but also the folks who really need to be hearing it and feeling empowered to change the systems and fight for something different.
I want to come back to Tyler's point about collective memories later on, because that just sparked a question that I have, but something that Leah said that I really wanted to hit on before. I know Jarius has to go, so I'll allow him to answer first. But Leah, you mentioned the brain drain. And as we all know, retaining young people, especially those who have obtained higher education degrees in the state, has been a huge problem for the state. And so I'm just curious to know, what do you all think are the causes of the brain drain? Is it simply a lack of opportunity, like a lot of people try to claim that it is, or is it much deeper than that?
So it definitely is a lack of opportunity. I have been on call, well, talked to several of you who tried to get jobs in Mississippi. I took off 2 years before coming to law school, and it's a challenge, not necessarily to find a job, but you know what you can give to a job and how dedicated you are, your expertise. So you want to be paid like what you're bringing, right? It's not enough all the time to just love the state of Mississippi, right? And a lot of people ask me to love the state of Mississippi just because I was born there, right? Like my people in this state are still, you know, being impacted by a lot of the racist acts, blatant racism that has happened over the years. So that love sometimes isn't enough, and it unfortunately can run out. I don't want mine to run out. That's why I'm in DC right now, and I still engage and move because the years that I was from the beginning of once I graduated in 2015 and all the way up until the 2 years that I took off from undergrad, I was tired. Was every year it was something going on. I enjoyed it, but at the end of the day, it was tiresome. And the only thing that I had to show for it was, I guess, my love for the state. So I think brain drain goes towards resources and opportunities. Leadership is not fun turning on the news wherever you are in the country and the world and seeing Mississippi, somebody in Mississippi stealing money. Some elected officials of Mississippi said something crazy. Mississippi is lynching, you know, Cindy has all kind of crazy stuff, and it's never really anything positive. The last thing I'll say is, I know all of us are well-traveled across the nation, and you know the response we get when we say we're from Mississippi, partly because of the perception they have about the state, which is hard for, once again, a couple of us on the call to change. But the second piece is, a lot of the times they met you before they knew you were from Mississippi, and they can't really connect the two because their idea of Mississippi, but your presentation, your talents, and what you bring doesn't make sense to them. So that's a challenge that people like ourselves face outside of the state as we continue to, you know, be young, live our lives, and navigate. But
I'm gonna hop in on that. What Jerry said. My mom always said, "Love don't put food on the table," and never has, never will, never does. And just for comparison, I work in nonprofit fundraising. Typically, in nonprofit world, development jobs are the higher band of jobs because you're bringing in revenue to support the organization. My cost of living in Birmingham is similar to what my cost of living would be in Jackson. Rent is about the same. Water prices and utilities may be a little bit higher, but my rent to live by myself, it's kind of similar for what I would be paying for a decent apartment in Jackson, right? But my entry level salary right out of college to move to Birmingham was 12% higher than it was at a well-established nonprofit in Jackson. That's an issue. So obviously, like, as a young person, you know, I don't have mommy and daddy to pay all my bills. You need to go where the money is. Well educated, you know, like, knew everything. But so I think we keep bringing, and it's a ripple effect. We keep bringing jobs that are not sustainable. And if anything, I think the South has really banked on manufacturing. And I think that's right. Like the labor and the physical labor is very important. Like, that's how things get done, but we're not passing on opportunities, or we're gatekeeping opportunities in jobs that have been known to create more wealth. We're not having people in banking. We don't have a lot of Black people in banking to support our minority business owners, and to start pushing philanthropic corporate dollars into Black communities. We don't have that. We don't have a lot of Black people working in housing, or if they do, they don't have a lot of pool and level, and you only see that in big urban metro areas. So that's an issue. My another point is, I'm saying this to our people and to our community. You've got to let young people lead. I think it's significant that Maisie, as young as she is able to have a head start, but she's only one. She's got 50 other peers who got ideas, but who are not being given a chance. And at some point, she doesn't have enough leverage to say, hey, give my 20 other friends a job or get their ideas in the front. It's time that our elders and stuff who made great strides, they were able to be in leadership young, but somehow they're gatekeeping and they're holding it. And that's one reason why I moved to Birmingham. Our mayor is 40 years old, or he just turned like 41, something like that. Randall's just turned 41. A lot of our city hall nonprofit leaders, corporate leaders, I'm in the largest Rotaract club in the world. Like, a lot of us have director, VP, SVP titles. This is a city that is prioritizing young leadership. And it's not like that in the rest of Alabama. I think Alabama looks down on Mississippi a lot, even though they don't really have room to talk. We're using $400 million to build prisons, but we're gonna leave that alone. But it's something about Birmingham and Huntsville, and I maybe even argue Mobile. They're recognizing young leadership, and they're saying, okay, let's give these people a chance. Do I think they could do it more? Absolutely. But I think they're recognizing that talent, and they realize it's a workforce issue. And if you lose your workforce, you're not going to have prosperity. You're not going to have economic, it's a complete ripple effect.
I would like to chime in on a few things. There's a few reasons why we have brain drain. Number one, education. I remember my senior year of high school, and it's like one of my regrets that I didn't say anything, but we had like 12 books in the class, and it was 3 of us looking at a book, and I never said anything about it. I was just like, well, like, my mindset is always getting used to like turmoil, instead of like, why don't we have a book a person? So education, political instability. The Gen Z are, according to data from the 2020 elections and also this past election, that 70% of young Gen Zers are 70% Democrat. That political ideology is not in Mississippi statewide as of currently. Another reason is healthcare access. We have a party that says that they're pro-life. If you're pro-life, why are we in a situation in the Mississippi Delta where 4 to 6 hospitals are about to shut down? Now, they oppose Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, all that. Okay, you oppose it, but you don't have an adequate solution other than overthrow it. So you say you're pro-life, but these women have to drive an hour and a half to go to a decent hospital. So nobody wants to come back to that. And it sucks. I'm a 24-year-old man, and I make more than my mom, who's a college professor in DC. I'm 24 years old. I think my mom's 47. I don't know her age. She's big on that. But that's an issue. And lastly is the economic opportunity. Mississippi does not have adequate economic opportunity. And a lot of people in our spaces, in our institutions and schools, don't understand economics to actually build on it and build a legacy on it. And I didn't take economics serious. That's why I flunked the class. So I was like, I gotta learn this stuff. I think the Lord telling me something. Like, well, I need to understand economics. So I failed the class. And I had to really get down and build grassroots of like, how does this stuff work? And I still don't understand. but I do understand the foundation of it. But economic opportunity, how to understand, read, apply, get in, take out, we don't understand that. And that's a big issue, is quantitative analysis in our communities. So those are my few reasons of why.
Yeah, I love that, Jordan and Leah. I think, I don't know, for Leah, I know you mentioned, or both of you, about development, economic development. You know, sometimes we always like whale hunting, trying to get like a big corporation to come in and bring jobs. Maybe there's manufacturing, maybe it's this. And yes, that's needed. But we also need to think about the local businesses that ground our communities. You know, you got to have manufacturing, but you also got to have that retail store. You got to have that coffee shop that someone is trying to start off. You got to have that retail store. And people got to be able to visibly see that they can actually have that opportunity. And I think sometimes that path isn't as clear. I know there's people like High Purpose Co. in Clarksville. They're giving micro loans and connecting business owners to capital, and really kind of changing the game, like pretty much trying to promote not needing to have collateral in order to get a business loan. You know, that is huge, especially given, you know, you shouldn't have to risk everything just so you start up a business that, you know, people want. So we got to have like a balanced approach to economic development and what jobs we're trying to promote and assisting those who haven't had the opportunity to do so. But also, there's also the need for planning. I can't express this enough. You gotta have a plan. In a lot of communities, people don't have a plan. You have nothing that you can go to the state legislature to actually advocate for. You're not collaborating with this city over here, this city over here, this city over here, who's also experiencing this collective problem and using your collective voice to say something. But I think that goes back to, you know, it's like the simple things for the plan. I'm talking about like a sidewalk right here, so kids don't have to walk in the grass, get to school, or a sidewalk so it's easier to get to a community neighborhood store. You know, we're talking about a park so people can sit down and enjoy nature and hear the birds chirp. Those are things that I care about. You know, I want somewhere that's walkable, that's nice, they got some trees where you can breathe. Some place you can escape a little bit. But we're talking about communities that don't have these basic amenities, communities who, you know, have to beg and plead to get the funds to build something like that. But also, it's a lot to expect just out of everyone's loving heart to go back to a town that has this hospital on the verge of collapse. You know, that is serious. No one's trying to deal with that. We're talking about a grocery store who's like left and you can't get no fresh lettuce. That's not fun. That's not fun at all. And it's a big burden to expect people like us to just stay in. But we also, to some degree, have some responsibility. But that's still a lot.
Tyler, I'm glad that you just mentioned the fact that you have to have a plan in order to be able to advocate. And I know one of the things that you brought up with me in the planning of this panel is that there has been a problem with community buy-in. And so, you know, you and I, we're both from the Delta, and we know that people in the Delta face sort of a unique and distinguishable set of structural and racial issues that many other people in other counties in Mississippi don't face. Both our hometowns are still predominantly racially segregated. We live in what is considered a food desert zone, so we don't have access to fresh and quality produce. At most, we typically have one grocery store. Most of our neighborhoods can't get high-speed internet access. Like you said, most of the hospitals that are in the Delta, they're on the brink of closing down. And, you know, there's also just still entrenched poverty throughout every piece of our livelihoods. And so I guess, you know, how do we get people to start creating a vision and a plan? And how do we start to get more community buy-in and get people passionate about advocating for change, especially in the Delta? And then to the larger panel, you know, how do we get other people in other parts of Mississippi to be more concerned about issues that are happening in other parts of Mississippi and not just within their own backyard? Because I know, especially, you know, when it comes to a lot of activists and advocates in Jackson, one of the things that I've heard a lot, you know, is like, oh, there's this Jackson bubble. So, you know, how do we break these bubbles in our communities and actually become a collective community of Mississippi citizens who care about what is happening in other parts of Mississippi?
Okay, y'all said so much good stuff in the last question. So I'm gonna try to like touch on those in a couple of seconds each that I think are really, really important, and then kind of like jump into the question that we're talking about now. Especially in what I see even some people in the comments, like how do we keep young people here? How do we keep young people motivated? And then also how do we use the energy that young people have? And this is kind of connecting to the question that we're talking about now, to like build collective power outside of our communities. I think again, super important. Even for me, I'm doing an application now, and they're talking about one of the final questions is like, okay, what now after graduation? Like, we need a very detailed summary of what exactly you want to do after graduation. And for me, somebody who really, really wants to stay here and be present in Mississippi, if you go on Indeed or if you go on some of these job websites, there may be like 4 jobs in like something that I may be interested in, maybe 3 across the state. And then of course I have to look at the salary, because I mean, like Leah said, love is not going to put food on the table. And it's like the absolute bare minimum you will need to just get by, not to thrive, not to save, not to build your savings, not to survive. And so kind of what Jordan was talking about, you know, the schools that we went to, you know, we did kind of get used to getting by with the bare minimum. And that's just not something that you want to do in your adult life, especially if you can have a say so about it. And so I think that, you know, there's a need for jobs, there's a need for compensation, there's a need for, you know, healthcare, all those different things play into part with each other. And so when we talk about like collective coalition building outside of our Jackson bubble, I think that was using the Jackson bubble as an example. I think that, like what Leah was talking about, we have people who are in these leadership positions or who have like the say so over the Jackson bubble, or like set the precedent, who like will not let those positions go. They will not learn to take a step back and let somebody new try something innovative, give some fresh ideas, connect with people in other communities who we may not have worked with before. And so I think that the issue in Jackson may not even really be that unique to Jackson, as I'm sure there are community stakeholders or leaders in other communities who are like, I don't trust them. Our issues are not their issues. I'm good with how I've been doing things in my community. And I think that we really have to let people people need to get out of that prideful bubble. People need to like learn what servant leadership is. And I think that if we really start to, because Jackson's not the only community in Mississippi that has water issues, whose water was running brown or not at all. And so I think that people like issues like that are like, if we say, hey, I'm in this place, you're 150 miles down the road, we're having the same issues, there's obviously a conversation that needs to be had. And so I think that having honest conversations, having open conversations, and really, really helping people find the commonalities in communities across the state will really, really help with coalition building.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we need people to collaborate more, you know, and the biggest enemy for collaboration is trust. People just don't trust each other. And but you need to have spaces where you get folks in a room, and it can be like social spaces where you can see someone as a human and not like what they're trying to do or this or that. But a lot of times you don't have places like that. You don't have like that green space where or that farmer's market that you see folks regularly every week, you know. You got, you know, we see each other at church, but everybody didn't go to 10, 15 different churches. So, you know, we got to collaborate more and listen across the aisle with so many folks too. And I also wanted to say, when it comes to planning, you know, a lot of cities have comprehensive plans. And they pretty much a plan how they want their city to grow 15, 5, 10 years from now. A lot of times the community voice isn't embedded in those plans that really set the agenda for those following years. And so what I would like to see, especially like in the Delta, I'm talking about go neighborhood, having some meetings, door knocking, and developing a plan that really centers people's voices in that. And it can range from things like, these conversations around broadband, how we approach like healthcare, how do we do this? How do we get folks buy-ins on community gardens? It can be all encompassing.
I would say, I think we have to start looking at what is the issue presents itself in different forms. And so how does the base issue affects us all, which is one like racism, which affects equity, access, economic opportunity, all these different things. And I remember when we were doing the statue stuff, as a college student, we didn't, and Ariel may feel differently, Tyler may feel differently, but we didn't feel supported by other Black students across the state. We didn't feel that love from Jackson State or from State, Southern Miss, or different things like that. And so I think it starts there. A lot of our advocacy work started when we were younger and in college, and we're having to rebuild those partnerships and those relationships now, as young adults. And so there's a trust barrier there, because it's like when we were struggling 4 years ago, this was the reaction. And now here we are having to build better for Mississippi. And so I think recognizing what the base issue is, and, it presents itself in the Jackson water crisis. It presents itself in Clarksdale being food deserts, in Oxford, people being pushed out of Oxford. So how look at that base issue and say, this is what affects us all, and how can we lend support? Because our friends in Jackson can connect us to our lawmakers and to our leaders and those who have decisions. Who's the head of the Ways and Means Committee? Who's the head of the budget? Some of you probably interned for them or clerked for, so how do we leverage our connections and our relationships to build it better for all? Because if one part of the state is economically suffering, Mississippi will not be prosperous until we have people in the Delta who have running water, just point blank period. Jackson can get $1 million corporations and people can be making as much money, but the state will continue to suffer if, one, those people don't pay taxes, and then two, if we tax the Delta people to the ground and they don't have running water. So what affects us all, and how do we bring it back as a whole?
So we're approaching the hour, but I'm going to give Jordan a quick little minute to add something into there. And then I'm going to ask the last question to try to wrap things up a bit so I can be respectful of people's times. But Jordan.
Okay, I'll do it rapid fire. I would say, like you said earlier, create a plan. A lot of issue with Mississippians and other urban areas is organization, and people hire too many of their friends too, and they don't know what they're doing, and they're not experts in what they're doing. But we are not organized, not. And then somebody who's a collective that has the power to unite. One person has an agenda, another person has an agenda. They got beef. They ain't doing this. They talk about each other. We've all heard it. And it just goes back to enhancing the problem. So organizing, creating a plan, and yeah, it's like creating a thesis, like this chapter we're doing this week we're doing this week we're doing this. Not, all right, we got a plan. All right, when is it gonna get done? Or so and so did that, but I wanted to do that. So it's just a lot of that. But organizing and being on the same team and killing the crabs in the barrel mentality.
Amen.
So I had a different question to kind of wrap things up, since we were also supposed to kind of get into the healing and the reconciliation side, because I know that we've addressed a lot of the issues. I know Donna is excited for us to possibly do a part 2 of this conversation. So I know that's something that all of us will talk about offline if our schedules are able to fit it in. But one of the questions that was actually in the comments on Facebook, which I think would be a good wrap up, is someone asks, what advice or tips would you give an aspiring young adult who is passionate about advocacy and bringing about change within communities and organizations in Mississippi?
I would say very quickly, you just have to go out there and do it. Like, there's never going to be a right time. You're never going to have all the perfect things to say. You might not always have the best of connections to get your message out in the way that you want to the first time, but you honestly just have to pace yourself, say, what do I care about? What am I passionate about? What do I know how to do? Who do I know? What's the best way I can get this information out there? How fast can I do it? And just having the guts and having the heart to just say, hey, this is what I believe in. This is what I want to happen. This is who I need to help. This is who I need to call out. This is who needs to be held accountable. All of those things you really just have to be able to do and to be able to say, and then also just expanding your worldview, understanding that activism and resistance doesn't look the same for all of us. And so yours may be art, yours may be there's just so many different ways that you can resist, and so many ways that you can be active, and that you can educate your community, that you can spread awareness. So don't ever just put yourself in a box. Don't think that you don't have enough followers or money or connections to do it, because I think we all know the stories about some of the most prominent people that we know for, fighting for civil and human rights now, who also didn't have those connections or didn't have the money and the fame and the access. And so just don't ever be discouraged, and just truly do the best that you can do with what you have. It'll all come in abundance later on.
Well, you summed that up. I would say just try to find your niche. I feel like as a young person, you can get so broad. Like, I want to do gun reform. I want to do health policy. I want to do housing. And sometimes when you just doing all the different jobs, you lose sight of yourself and what my purpose and what I'm trying to do. So I would say kind of write down what you're into, what you research constantly, what's your niche, and really try to become an expert at that if you can, and read about it, obsess yourself about it. YouTube, podcasts, conversations. And, like, this stuff just doesn't happen overnight. You got to be obsessive about your passions. So, a lot of people see the glory with people, but they don't see the story. So get to reading. I know I got to read some more. So you're not the only one. So.
All right. Amen. And I want to add to that, I think it's important for you to not beat yourself up, Don't beat yourself up, because and you got to recognize when you are. Like, the other day I was at my sister's house and I was just like, oh, I should have did this, I should have did that, or I should have did this, and I could have just left it alone. Like, I did, and I got a mantra. What I usually say, I did the best that I could when I could. I let it go. I did the best that I could when I could. Let it go. So that's important. And, and like what Mason and Jordan said, you got to get out there. You got to do something. You can't be afraid. Well, you can't be afraid, but do it afraid. And to really, you got to show up. You got to show up. I know a year ago, I didn't know many farmers in Mississippi. But then I went and I showed up. I went to this meeting. I went to that meeting. I went to this meeting. And at some point, folks are going to recognize you and say, hey. And sometimes you don't have to speak or be loud or just announce your presence. Sometimes it's okay to just sit down, be quiet, and listen and learn. But yeah, definitely don't beat yourself up.
Tracy McMillan Cotton, who's a great author, MacArthur Fellow, she did this quote that said, the institution cannot love you. And if I had learned freshman year at Ole Miss, God, I wouldn't take therapy now. And remember what you're fighting for. For me in college, my why was my sister. And she walked onto a campus with no Confederate statue in the center of it. And that was my why. Now as a my why is Black need access to green space. That's my why in this job. And so I remember that, but I take time for myself. I invest in myself. Eat the meals, eat when you're hungry, drink water when you need to. And it's okay to have so many passions. But I think young Black people, especially young Black women, really get pulled into all these DEI issues, and we want you to serve on this committee and XYZ. But the institution cannot love you. It will not love you. And quite frankly, a lot of the people that you're doing it for, they'll make a positive benefit, won't like you in the process. So just stay true to yourself, find your center, find your personal board of directors, your people, and network. Coalition build, and advocacy is called coalition building, and corporate is called networking. But get to know every single person that you meet. A lot of activists and advocacy people are actually introverts, but they know how to be kind to people and speak to people. And so you never know who will be beneficial to you and how y'all can work together. Jordan and I didn't really meet until this past spring, but we've known about each other for the last 3 or 4 years. Same thing with Maisie. And so like never counting people out and always building my diverse networks. And y'all young folks, like in high school and college, y'all have a lot of 30-year-old like social media and all the different things, and like how it's a lot more virtual now. Y'all have so much access that I didn't have in high school, and that we didn't even have in college. You know, like we didn't have that 3-4 years ago. And so use that to your advantage. Build networks and build coalitions with people for your personal development, for your advocacy goals, and your professional development.
This conversation has been so heartwarming. I'm sad to see it end. Again, I hope that we can actually do a second part of it. Each of you know that I love you deeply. I'm so grateful for you and your time to be on this panel today, and I can't wait to see you all soon. Donna, I will turn it back over to you to wrap it up.
Thank you. Well, that hour went fast, as we knew that it would. You guys were amazing. And just sitting here listening to every word you said, I took lots of notes. I may be in touch with some of you about some of the things you talked about for some journalism. But yes, we would, if y'all can get it together and you're interested in doing it, we would love to just pick up on part 2 whenever you would be, willing and able to do it with Ariel. Just to kind of continue the conversation. I could tell from the comments that were kind of, they were on fire, and that's just the Facebook comments. The show was out in a variety of ways. So people were really enjoying the conversation, and just, I kind of think just being inspired by all of you as much as anything else. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being inspiring. Thank you so much for Ariel for putting this together. Really appreciate this happening, and on this special day, as we kept talking about the Day of Healing, the National Day of Racial Healing. And on that note, there is the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, which started the Day of Healing 7 years ago, is actually tonight hosting this event, hosting this event. The actual host there will be Joy Reid, as I understand it, but it's a panel, a town hall discussion from New Orleans, and it's going to be on MSNBC and Peacock tonight it's at 9 Central, 10 Eastern, and whatever else, however that translates for where you are. I know it's going to be an amazing conversation. Rhea Williams Bishop, who we all know well here in Jackson, was on MFP Live last week, and she is going to be part of the conversation as well as others. So we encourage folks to tune in tonight and hear that conversation. And then I also want to mention one other thing, which is just really tangentially related, but Kimberly Griffin, our publisher, will be very upset if I don't. It is Member Month at the Mississippi Free Press, which is nonprofit media. And we have this amazing lineup of people who speak about all sorts of things for our members. The one that's upcoming is Ellen Morris Pruitt, who is talking about creativity. If you haven't been a member of the MFP VIP Club, then you can join for as little as $10 a month, and you'll be able to see all the past recordings as well as all the future experiences. So please make a note of this if you're interested in just kind of working on your own creative side and getting inspired. So other than that, thank you guys again for being here. We really appreciate you, not only for this conversation, but for what each of you are doing and have done for the state from all parts of it, which is just wonderful to hear you talking about your own areas, and also what you're doing out there around the country, even though we're always keeping the light on for you back here in Mississippi. if you can ever, when those of you can find your way back, if you're not here already. So thank you all, and everyone have a wonderful week, and thanks.